Right, welcome back to the show. Our very next guest for this morning is Lady Olorotwa from an organization called the Tshiamiso Trust, and her name is Mayor Lusanda Jiya, and she's here to talk to us about something that's been happening for a couple of weeks now in terms of Africa Tshiamiso Trust. So she's here this morning to have a conversation with us today to try and explain what exactly it is that they do and who is the people that they're looking to try and come in. A very, very good morning to you, Lusanda, and thank you very much for making time.
Thank you very much, Kego.
All right, fantastic. Lusanda, tell me a little bit about, you work for a company or an organization called the Tshiamiso Trust. Please give me a bit of a background about what it is that you guys do and why you're here today.
Okay, thank you very much. The Tshiamiso Trust was established as the outcome of a class action in South Africa against the gold mining industry. Essentially, the gold mining industry was taken to court to compensate mine workers for occupational lung diseases suffered in the mine. And it's two specific lung diseases. We're talking about silicosis and work-related TB. Now, it's going to be important why I emphasize work-related TB, because TB is a social disease. There are many ways in which people get TB. So we're talking about TB that was diagnosed while a mine worker was working in the gold mine or within 12 months of them leaving employment. So Tshiamiso Trust was established as at the outcome of this particular class action as a result of a settlement agreement where 6 of the mining companies decided to take responsibility for paying out compensation to ex-mine workers who suffered permanent lung disease because of tuberculosis and work-related TB and silicosis. The 6 mining companies are African Rainbow Minerals, Anglo-American South Africa, Anglo Gold Ashanti, Goldfields, Harmony, and Sibanye Stillwater. Between the 6 of them, they owned specific 82 gold mines within the specified time period for the compensation, which is March 1965 to December of 2019. So in terms of the settlement, then they established the trust to basically give effect to implement their agreement. So we've been doing work in Botswana actually as far back as February of 2021, but at that point mine workers could simply register, i.e. lodge a claim. To say, I've worked in a qualifying mine in the qualifying period and I'm stepping forward in order to get assessed, because obviously to get to whether you're eligible for compensation, you must meet the qualifying criteria. What we started more recently that you would have seen more of as Botswana is that we started doing the benefit medical examinations that are the basis on which we decide whether you have a compensable disease and lung damage that then allows us to calculate the compensation. We started doing that at the end of November last year. And in this period of just over 6 months, we've done 1.9, precise figure I think is 1,970 benefit medical examinations. And out of that exercise, we have to date paid 76.6 million bula to qualifying ex-mine workers. A smaller percentage of that, about 7 million bula, is to deceased claimants.
The dependents thereof.
The dependents of deceased claimants. But we'll go into a bit of detail about that later.
Fantastic stuff. I heard you mention that there is some eligibility criteria. Maybe talk to me about that eligibility.
So the eligibility criteria are quite strict. As I said, it's first of all, you must have worked in a qualifying mine, which is one or more of 82 specific mines. These are listed on our website, and the list is available to anybody who asks for it. We've provided it to government, to some of the social, civil society organizations in Botswana who are assisting some of the mine workers. You have have to have worked qualifying mine in the qualifying period being between March 1965, December 2019. And thirdly, you must have done what is called risk work. Risk work refers to work that exposed you to breathing in silica dust. Yep.
So just so I can try and understand this. So if I'm an administrative clerk and I was working in an office, the likelihood of me having developed something as a result, it's next to none.
Next to none.
Okay, fantastic stuff.
Yes.
Now, I'd like to imagine that also as a trust, there's an envisioned number of people that you're trying to reach out to. Is there a set target in terms of how many people you'd like to come forward, or is it as many as possible?
As many as possible. That's the short answer.
Okay.
We might have a sense based on the trust at its inception was handed over lists by the mining companies, by the claimants' attorneys that said we estimate. Okay, but people move around.
Yeah.
Also, 1965 was a long time ago, and records weren't necessarily digitized.
Yeah.
So you don't necessarily know where people are. We have a rough estimate of people who worked in those mines in the qualifying period, but we don't even know enough to know if they did risk work. So we have no target.
Yep.
It's as many people as step forward who go through the tests or in the event of it being dependence of a deceased mine worker, submit the documentation that is evidence to support the claim and meet the qualifying criteria will get paid.
Okay, so actually I think that brings me to my next question in terms of if I have maybe a great-grandfather or grandfather of mine who was maybe working in the mines and, he died as a result of something that was complicated or that was a result of having worked in those mines, how do I then formally lodge a complaint? Or,
you can lodge a claim as a dependent of a deceased ex-mine worker. That is the harder category to prove for obvious reasons. The mine worker isn't there to undergo the tests themselves, so we can assess the level of damage to their lungs. So you depend on documentation to prove the case. The documentation starts with the most important thing is that you're going to have to prove that the mine worker died with silicosis as the primary cause of death or work-related TB as a primary cause of death. There is one category where it is sufficient for them to have died with silicosis, even if they died of something else. But that's a smaller category that gets a small amount of money. The rules are quite complex, as you might guess. We have 10 categories for payments. So the rules get refined for each one of them. But you have to prove primary cause of death. You also have to prove that you are the correct person who qualifies to lodge as a dependent of that individual. So you have to prove either through marriage or this is your father and so on. So you have to prove that. That becomes a little bit harder to do, but it's possible. Yes. As I said, of the 76.6 million pula that I talked about, 7.1 is to dependents of deceased mine workers.
Right, we take a very, very short break and we come back on the other side with more conversation as of course re bua about Tshiamiso Trust go leka go tlhaloganya gore sentle ha ile gore gongwe maybe motsadi wa gago kana a grandparent le gore na berekela Tshiamiso Trust le gore gongwe o tla bona bolwetse bongwe mo ile gore na dira go berekong le gore ke di mine tsa teng. If the parent was somebody who was working with them, how it is that you can get in touch with them. So we take a very, very short break and tla bua on the other side of this. Right, welcome back to the show. I have been in conversation with Lusanda Jiya, and she is the spokesperson from the Tshiamiso Trust, are entrusted with trying to assist what is due to them. Before the break, we were understanding, things like criteria, things like who's eligible, and understanding which companies you needed to have worked for. But right now, Lusanda, tell me about things like rejection. I'd like to imagine that there's some people that have come forward and unfortunately you've had to deal them with bad news in terms of we cannot process your claim. Talk to me about what criteria would a person not have to meet in terms of being rejected, or just how do you then reject a person who's come forward and said, but I did work at these mines as well?
It's sad.
Yeah.
And it's ironic because normally people aren't happy to be ill, but in this instance, you're talking to people who may be destitute, and this would have been income that could have relieved some of the pressure financially, and you have to say no if the person doesn't meet the qualifying criteria. And fundamentally, that's it. It's that you are found not to be medically eligible. Is the only criteria essentially for us rejecting a claim, is if you don't meet the medical eligibility criteria.
Or if you're a dependent, if you're unable to prove that indeed I am this person's dependent. Okay.
Yes, because they have to be rules around that, because you could have any number of people claiming to
I was going to say that, back in the day when it comes to our parents, we knew, you could have brothers and sisters all over the place just because of the result of the working in another country.
Yeah, and for us, which is why, for instance, a relationship with government becomes important, because we need to be able to verify people who come forward and identify themselves, and we also need to be cognizant of the laws in a particular country. We don't get to decide as the trust what type of marriages are legally acceptable in a country.
Yeah.
We are not the ones who decide how marriages are registered, and so we work closely with the correct entities to understand if to prove that documentation we get is valid and legal according to the laws of that country, for us to look at it. If it isn't and doesn't meet those criteria, we're also not going to look at it.
I get that completely. Lusanda, I'd like to imagine that you're not going to be doing this exercise indefinitely. There is a closing period. How long are you guys going to be running this exercise for?
The trust runs until December of 2031.
Okay.
However, we will only be accepting new claims until December of 2029. There's an additional 2 years that's given for us to then wrap up and make sure we deal with everything that would have been in the pipeline administratively. We clear that out. So this is part of the push, even in Botswana, why it's a rush for us. It's important for claimants to put in their claims now, not wait. There will be, I expect, a small number of people who may be medically ineligible now, who might want to try one more time before we close, because the trustee does allow for that. If you're found medically ineligible now, because we accept that these are diseases that may progress, and you might meet medical eligibility criteria in another few years, you can put in a second claim. You would have to pay for the benefit medical examination then, but it would get refunded, of course, if you are proven to be eligible. But the big push for us now is there's no need to wait. We have a period in which we exist, and then we shut down. So we are really in Botswana to ask us for us to step forward. You need to get tested. If you've been tested for other things, other organizations and other entities have different rules. So we need to test you according to our rules. That you've done medical examinations before should not stop you from stepping forward now. That's what we're appealing for. Please do step forward. And one thing that we're introducing that's new, starting this week actually, is that you can also lodge claims with the medical service provider that we're using. Because before you could only go to DEBA to go and lodge your claim and then wait until we call you to book a benefit medical examination. We are now able to say that Stockford Health, the company that is a service provider, will also do lodgements. What that allows us to do is two things. One, it enables people to walk in. If the Stockford Health facility in Gaborone is permanently, so you can walk in and come and lodge. When we do outreaches to other towns outside of Gaborone, mobile unit, you can come and lodge at that place. So, for instance, at the end of this week, we're going to Kanye. It means people from Kanye and areas around Kanye who may not be able to get to Mlopulole or Palape can come when we are there on those days to lodge. And that also allows them, so it's shorter distances to travel, but also you can get the benefit medical examination done as much as possible on the same day is what we're trying to do, or within a couple of days, so less waiting also.
Okay, I'd imagine that's one of the challenges that you do face in terms of when you're trying to get people to come forward. Maybe talk to me about some of the other challenges that you've maybe encountered during this time that you have been getting people to try and come forward, and how you've been able to find some resolution to them.
One of our biggest challenges actually is with deceased dependents claims. And as I said, living claims are a little bit easier to process. The mine worker is still there. They can undergo the tests themselves. Deceased dependents claims are harder because it's documentary evidence that's required. And one of the key things in Botswana has been around death certificates and the fact that essentially death certificates don't state a cause of death.
Yeah, unless you get a, what's it called, a post-mortem done, it's really hard to tell what the cause might have been. Yeah.
So this is one of the challenges that the trust has had, because the trust deed, which is the settlement agreement that the parties signed, which is our rule book, only accepted death certificates and no other document that can prove cause of death. But thankfully, very recently, the mining companies and the attorneys, claimants attorneys, have settled on an amendment.
Okay.
And this amendment allows us to now accept other documents where cause of death may be stated. So coming from the hospital, the attending physician, and other documents, we don't know what they will be because they're likely to be a bit different from country to country across the 8 countries where we operate as a trust. But at least it's going to allow us now the latitude and flexibility to look at other official documents that prove cause of death and not just a death certificate. I think that should release quite a bit. Other issues that are challenges really have to do sometimes with people not understanding the trust as being distinct from other entities, and therefore the rules and how they are applied seem harsh, out of context, and people conflate us with a whole lot of other entities that are probably in the same space. It's gold mining companies, a specific set, 82 mines, qualifying mines in the qualifying period, and that's all the trust can actually compensate on.
Okay. I'd like to imagine that the world that we live in, I'd not even like to imagine the world that we do live in, everybody's a chancer. There's a person who might say, well, let me try and scam, be it online or maybe in person. Have you encountered any such incidents where people are trying to maybe pull a fast one over your, I don't know if you've got anything.
It happens. We get reports sometimes. Here's how we deal with it. Firstly, we speak to claimants to make sure they understand no one can lodge a claim on your behalf. Okay. First of all, be very clear. No one can lodge a claim on your behalf. Secondly, the only people who can assist you with a claim are the Tshiamiso Trust themselves or people that we have appointed as service providers. In Botswana, that would be DEBA and Stockford Health. Those are the only people who can assist you. Any other person who claims they can assist you with the Tshiamiso Trust, who doesn't work for Tshiamiso Trust or these two entities, is taking your money. They are not. That money is not coming to the trust. There's only 2 categories of people who have to pay at the trust. It's if you've worked for less than 5 years, or, as I referred earlier, you are doing a second claim, having been initially found medically ineligible. Anybody else, any other money you're being asked for is not coming to the trust. Be very clear about that. So, and if any of the entities that we have appointed, somebody who works for them asks you for money, report to them. Please do so.
Okay, fantastic. And just a final question before we close. I heard you mention that you are doing something later on this week in Kanye. Talk to me about any other places that you might be outreaching to within the month of June and maybe even into July.
So last week we were in Mulapulula. This week, today and tomorrow, we're in Gaborone, but of course that's a facility that is open throughout.
Continuously,
Yes, continuously. And then on Thursday and Friday this week, we are in Kanye.
Okay.
And what's very important in Kanye is, as I said, you can now come to the benefit medical examination site and lodge there if you meet the qualifying criteria to lodge. And we will as much as possible, numbers dependent of course, because we've got people who are actually booked, but we will try as much as possible, even if it means we must extend the time to do your benefit medical examination before we leave. Right. So encourage you, if you're around Kanye, surrounding areas, please come through and do that, and that's Thursday and Friday this week. We will announce other outreaches that we do as we move, but claimants can still go to Mulopulule and Palapet to go and lodge, and they can come to Stockford Health in Gaborone to lodge as well as to do the BMEs, and then they must listen out for other dates. We are in Botswana for as long as we need to be in Botswana.
I like that very much. And on that note, Lusanda, I think you're doing some really fantastic work. I think it's thankless work that you do, and a lot of people will not get to meet people like you, you are advocating for. But the elderly, unfortunately, as a result of history, they've been suffering for a long time. So thank you for what you're doing, and all the best with the project, and thank you very much for making the time for us today.
And please do come and lodge. That's my final word.
Right, folks. Lusanda Jiya. She's from Tshiamiso Trust. If you know that maybe your grandparent or your parent or maybe somebody within your family used to work for one of these mining entities, specifically gold mines. I heard her saying that there is a limited number of mines that are involved. Just at the very least, you can find out. They do have social media platforms, and they do have a website as well that you can just log on to them at Tshiamiso Trust and go and see if maybe one of the people in your family does qualify, and who knows, it might just change your life. Thank you so much for your time again, Lusanda. Lekamoso.